When soldiers marched into battle in World War II, their survival didn't just depend on bullets and bombs, it depended on what was in their mess tin. From American GIs choking down powdered eggs to Japanese troops boiling grass and bark when supplies ran out, food shaped the fate of millions. But what these men ate wasn't just strange, sometimes it was horrific. Later in this video, we'll reveal the disturbing truth about the desperate meals soldiers turned to when hunger became more dangerous than the enemy. Stay with us, because the story of what troops ate in World War II is darker than you think. For the average American soldier in World War II, food was both a source of pride and a constant complaint. The U.S. Army developed a series of rations: the K ration, C ration, and B ration, each designed for different situations. The K ration, a small box meant for a single day, included biscuits, cheese spread, canned meat, instant coffee, and sometimes even a piece of chewing gum. At first, soldiers marveled at its compact design, but reality set in quickly. A box meant for 3 meals barely equaled 3,000 calories, and combat troops could burn double that in a single day. Soldiers joked that K stood for killer, not because it was strong, but because it starved them. Letters home reveal the frustration. One GI in Italy wrote, "We've eaten so many C rations, I can't tell if I'm fighting the Germans or the meat in the can." The C ration, meant to provide hot meals in the field, came in heavy cans of stew, beans, or Spam. Soldiers often carried the cans for weeks, eating them cold with their bayonets, because fires would reveal their position. Troops described the taste as grease with a side of cardboard. Yet when fresh rations did arrive, the morale boost was enormous. A hot breakfast with real eggs or a rare slice of pie from a field kitchen could lift spirits more than ammunition. But as the war dragged on, supply lines struggled to keep up. On long pushes through France, many GIs went days on K rations alone. They bartered with civilians, traded with British troops, or scavenged local farms for chickens, potatoes, or even wine. The irony was clear. America had the most advanced logistical machine in history, but for the man in the foxhole, food often meant monotony and hunger. And while the U.S. soldier was usually better fed than his enemy, the boredom of Spam and powdered coffee created its own mental strain. Later in this video, we'll see how the contrast with Japanese rations revealed a horrifying truth. Sometimes, being well-fed was just as demoralizing as starving. For British troops, the war's taste was defined by one thing: tea. Whether in the North African desert or the mud of Normandy, soldiers clung to their tea rations like lifelines. Each man was issued a small pack of black tea, sugar, and powdered milk, and they would go to extraordinary lengths to brew it, even under fire. One officer recalled, "We'd risk a sniper's bullet for a proper cup of tea. Without it, the war would have been lost." But aside from tea, British rations were notoriously grim. The daily ration often included tinned bully beef, a salty corned beef paste, hard biscuits that could crack teeth, and canned vegetables. Soldiers invented ways to make the monotony tolerable, mixing bully beef with biscuit crumbs to create a kind of hash, or trading for American chocolate when fighting alongside GIs. Still, British troops often complained that their food was more punishment than sustenance. Fresh rations were rare. Supply shortages in North Africa meant some soldiers went weeks on little more than tea, bully beef, and jam. Letters home paint a bleak picture. One infantryman wrote, "We have bully beef for breakfast, bully beef for dinner, and bully beef for tea. If we see another cow, we'll shoot it out of spite." Even when field kitchens provided stews, they were watery, bland, and filled with whatever could be scavenged. What set the British experience apart was rationing at home. Soldiers knew their families were struggling with food shortages too, and this often gave them a sense of grim solidarity. Civilians lived on powdered eggs, bread stretched with potato flour, and meager meat portions. Troops in the field sometimes felt guilty when they received luxuries like canned fruit or chocolate, knowing their children hadn't seen those things in years. The monotony of British rations had a strange effect. It hardened soldiers' resolve. Meals were never satisfying, but they were reliable, and the cup of tea at the end of the day became almost sacred. Yet, as we'll see later, not all armies had even this luxury. When we turn to Japanese soldiers on remote islands, their diet spiraled into something far darker than bully beef. Desperation that led some to eat the unthinkable. German soldiers entered the war with rations that reflected their nation's efficiency and discipline. Early in the conflict, the Wehrmacht's standard rations seemed plentiful compared to its enemies. Rye bread, sausage, cheese, and tinned meat. Soldiers often received coffee substitutes made from roasted barley or chicory, since real coffee was scarce. They carried iron rations, emergency packs with hard bread, canned meat, and chocolate, meant to sustain them in dire situations. At first, many troops felt they were well provided for. But as the war stretched into the east, cracks appeared, supply lines faltered, and German soldiers increasingly relied on ersatz food, substitutes that were tasteless and barely nutritious. Bread might be mixed with sawdust or ground-up turnips. Coffee substitutes tasted like burnt dirt. Even their sausage, once a point of national pride, was padded out with fillers until it barely resembled meat. A soldier in Stalingrad wrote, "Our bread is so black and dense, we cannot tell if it is food or coal." Letters home revealed the growing desperation. Soldiers begged their families to send care packages with butter, real coffee, or chocolate. By 1943, these packages became lifelines, but even families in Germany were struggling under rationing. Civilians faced strict limits on meat and fat, leaving little to spare for the front. On the battlefield, German soldiers scavenged aggressively. They looted Soviet villages for potatoes, slaughtered livestock, and even stripped abandoned Red Army supply dumps. In some cases, they stole from Allied Italian or Romanian troops who were already starving. As conditions worsened, especially in the east, morale began to crack under hunger. Hunger was no longer just discomfort, it was despair. And yet, German soldiers clung to food as ritual. Shared bread around a campfire or a rare bottle of schnapps became moments of fleeting humanity in a brutal war. But in Stalingrad, when the rations collapsed entirely, the true horror of starvation appeared. Soldiers ate their horses, boiled leather straps, and some even whispered of darker acts. Later in this video, we'll see how the Soviet side mirrored that same nightmare, and why food became the most devastating weapon of all on the Eastern Front. For Soviet soldiers, food was both a weapon and a curse. The Red Army entered the war with a ration system that promised bread, porridge, cabbage soup, and sometimes meat. But the reality was far harsher. By 1941, when the Germans invaded, supplies collapsed under the chaos of retreat. Soldiers often went days on little more than a crust of black bread and a bowl of watery soup. Unlike the American or even British systems, which emphasized calories and balance, Soviet rations were bare minimum, fuel for bodies, not meals for men. The Red Army's standard issue included kasha, a porridge of buckwheat or millet, along with cabbage soup called shchi. When lucky, soldiers received a slice of salted pork fat, which they would rub against bread to make it edible. Meat was rare, sugar even rarer, and tea was often just hot water with a pinch of leaves reused several times. Vodka rations were sometimes issued, not for nutrition, but for morale. Soldiers would drink before assaults, using liquid courage to storm enemy positions. Letters from the front reveal how hunger gnawed at them. One soldier wrote during the siege of Leningrad, "We dream only of bread. Even bullets do not frighten us like hunger does." At Stalingrad, the nightmare was worse. Entire units starved. Soldiers boiled leather belts, chewed on bark, or ate stray dogs. Official records show that the average soldier consumed as little as 1,200 calories a day during critical periods, half of what was needed just to survive in combat. Yet the Soviet soldier adapted. They scavenged, hunted rats, and dug up frozen potatoes from abandoned fields. When supplies did arrive, a loaf of bread, a slice of sausage, they were shared with reverence. Soldiers divided rations with mathematical precision, knowing even a crumb could mean the difference between life and death. In moments like these, food wasn't just sustenance, it was solidarity. But hunger also broke men. Desertions rose in starving units, and morale sank. The German army used this to their advantage, deliberately cutting supply lines to starve defenders. Hunger became became a battlefield weapon, just as deadly as artillery. Later in this video, we'll uncover how, despite these horrific conditions, Soviet resilience turned food, or the lack of it, into one of the greatest weapons of resistance in the entire war. If American soldiers complained of monotony and British soldiers endured bully beef, Japanese soldiers faced something far worse: starvation as a way of life. The Japanese army was built on the concept of gaman, enduring hardship without complaint. Their diet reflected this. The standard ration was rice, pickled vegetables, dried fish, and sometimes miso soup. In theory, this sounded simple, but nourishing. In reality, Japan's stretched supply lines and isolated island campaigns made even this meager diet impossible. On remote Pacific outposts, soldiers often survived on little more than rice mixed with grass, bark, or coconuts. Meat was almost non-existent, and vegetables rotted before reaching the front. Soldiers became gaunt, their bodies wasting away. One Japanese diary from Iwo Jima reads, "We have eaten all the dogs, the rats, even the weed. Still, we fight." Diseases like beriberi, caused by vitamin deficiency, spread rapidly. Soldiers' bodies broke down not from bullets, but from hunger. The culture of endurance made things worse. Complaining was forbidden, and soldiers were taught to view hunger as a test of loyalty. Commanders punished those who scavenged or begged, forcing men to suffer silently. Some units resorted to horrific measures. Cannibalism is documented on several Pacific islands, where starving soldiers turned on enemy corpses, and sometimes even their own. Yet, despite this horror, Japanese soldiers often fought with incredible ferocity. Hunger seemed to strip them of everything but raw willpower. American Marines were stunned by the skeletal defenders they encountered, men so starved they could barely stand, yet still refusing to surrender. What's chilling is how deliberate it was. Japan's military planners assumed soldiers could survive on half the calories of Western troops. They believed hunger would make them leaner, tougher, and more obedient. Instead, it killed them in staggering numbers. Later in this video, we'll confront the dark truth. For many Japanese soldiers, food was never intended to keep them alive. It was just enough to keep them fighting until they died. If rations for frontline troops were grim, those for prisoners of war were nothing short of catastrophic. Captured soldiers on all sides endured hunger that turned into torture. For Allied POWs in German camps, the daily ration was meager: a slice of black bread, a ladle of watery soup, maybe a spoonful of margarine. Red Cross packages became lifelines, providing chocolate, cigarettes, and canned meat. But these packages didn't always arrive. Many POWs lost half their body weight over the course of captivity. Hunger was constant, gnawing, inescapable. In Japanese camps, the situation was even darker. Prisoners received a handful of rice and little else. Diseases like dysentery and scurvy spread rapidly. Survivors recall the desperation: men scraping maggots from rice, fighting over scraps, or risking beatings to steal food. One prisoner wrote, "We became less than animals. We thought only of food." Death from starvation was common. Even Soviet POWs fared worse than most. Captured by the Germans in the millions, they were deliberately starved to death. Rations were cut so low they could not sustain life. Historians estimate over 2 million Soviet POWs died from hunger and neglect. One of the greatest atrocities of the war. Food, or the denial of it, became a weapon of control. Guards withheld meals as punishment, knowing hunger could break even the strongest man faster than beatings. Prisoners dreamed of food, wrote recipes in their diaries, or hallucinated feasts. For them, food was no longer about survival. It became the last thread connecting them to humanity. The grim reality is that hunger defined captivity in World War II. It was psychological warfare, physical torment, and slow execution all at once. Later in this video, we'll see how the memory of this suffering shaped soldiers long after the war ended, and why food haunted their dreams more than the battlefield ever did. Where the official ration system failed, the black market thrived. World War II wasn't just fought with bullets. It was fought with bread, cigarettes, and cans of food traded like gold. Soldiers quickly learned that survival meant finding ways around the system, and across Europe and the Pacific, an underground economy flourished. In occupied France, Allied and German soldiers alike turned to farmers and locals, bartering cigarettes, chocolate, and soap in exchange for eggs, butter, or a piece of meat. A single can of American Spam could be traded for a meal big enough to feed an entire family. Soldiers smuggled supplies, sometimes at great risk, to trade for luxuries that official rations never provided. The German army, which faced growing shortages by the later years of the war, practically ran on black market exchanges. Soldiers sneaked bread from bakeries, traded with civilians, or looted abandoned farms. The ingenuity of soldiers became legendary. British troops, tired of endless tins of corned beef, crafted makeshift ovens from empty ammunition boxes to bake crude bread. Americans mixed instant coffee with powdered milk and sugar from their K-rations to invent a kind of battlefield latte. On the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers fried potato peelings over candle, turning scraps into a treat. Even in the jungles of the Pacific, Japanese troops learned to cook rice in bamboo tubes, disguising it with foraged plants. The darker side of this was theft. Soldiers stole from local civilians, sometimes leaving villages on the brink of starvation. In occupied territories, resentment festered as military forces consumed what little food remained. For civilians, soldiers weren't just liberators or oppressors. They were mouths to feed, often at the expense of their families. What makes this fascinating and disturbing is how normal it became. Letters from soldiers mention raiding the farmer's chicken coop as casually as describing a battle. Hunger blurred the line between survival and crime. By the war's end, the black market had grown into a massive shadow economy, shaping post-war recovery in Europe and Asia. Later, we'll look at how these wartime improvisations influenced the food culture of entire nations, from the rise of Spam in Asia to the persistence of simple soldier recipes in kitchens today. Food in World War II wasn't just about calories, it was about hope, morale, and the will to keep going. For many soldiers, hunger became the war's most relentless enemy. Diaries reveal how men dreamed of feasts, wrote letters home asking about family meals, and even swapped imaginary recipes to distract from gnawing stomachs. One American soldier recalled that he thought of home-cooked apple pie more often than his sweetheart, a shocking admission that revealed how food dominated the mind. Starvation broke men in ways combat couldn't. A soldier can survive a firefight with adrenaline, but hunger is slow, grinding, and inescapable. Men became irritable, depressed, and obsessed with food. Morale plummeted in starving units, and desertions rose. Hunger turned disciplined soldiers into desperate scavengers. In Japanese and Soviet armies, where rations were often inadequate, soldiers were reduced to stealing from comrades or even eating things that horrified them later: rats, worms, leather, or grass boiled into soup. The psychological scars lasted long after the war ended. Survivors of prison camps reported that even decades later, they still hoarded food, terrified of going hungry again. Many veterans developed eating disorders, overeating compulsively whenever food was available. Families of veterans recalled how meals became sacred, with fathers demanding that no scrap be wasted, no crust of bread thrown away. The trauma of hunger outlived the battlefield, and yet food also provided hope. Soldiers clung to the promise of mail packages or dreamed of victory banquets. The act of sharing a cigarette, splitting a chocolate bar, or heating coffee on a fire created bonds that battle alone could not. Food became memory, morale, and meaning. It kept men alive not only in body, but in spirit. Later in this video, we'll reveal the shocking truth of what some soldiers did when hunger finally pushed them past the limits of endurance. Choices so disturbing that veterans stayed silent about them for decades. The war ended, but the food of World War II never truly disappeared. The legacy of these rations, recipes, and hunger still shapes the modern world. For Americans, canned goods like Spam and powdered coffee became cultural staples. Spam spread across the Pacific, embraced by countries like the Philippines, South Korea, and Hawaii, where it remains beloved today. The GI coffee habit transformed America, cementing instant coffee as a household product. For Britain, the years of rationing stretched far beyond 1945. Civilians and soldiers alike learned to cook creatively with limited supplies. centuries, giving rise to recipes that still exist, like Woolton pie, a vegetable dish born from scarcity. In Germany and the Soviet Union, the trauma of hunger left deep cultural imprints. Families valued bread as sacred, often passing down wartime stories about how even crumbs could mean survival. Japan's wartime starvation had the most haunting legacy. For decades, survivors spoke quietly of the horrors they endured, and the culture of gammon, silent endurance, persisted. The memory of eating bark, grass, and worse stayed with an entire generation. In post-war Japan, food abundance became a symbol of recovery, and rice, once scarce, became the heart of national pride. But perhaps the darkest legacy is psychological. Veterans carried the memory of hunger all their lives. Many struggled with compulsive eating, food hoarding, or an inability to waste food. Families noticed how war shaped their eating habits. One child of a veteran said, "My father never left food on his plate, not once, even if it made him sick." The story of what soldiers ate in World War II is not just about strange rations or survival tactics, it's about the human cost of hunger. Behind every can of Spam, every scrap of bread, every bowl of watery soup was a man fighting not just the enemy, but his own body. It's a story of resilience, ingenuity, and horror. And it's a reminder that in war, survival isn't always about bullets or bombs. Sometimes it's about the next meal,